If you're just arriving, our first speaker, Tara Martin, has had to call out because she's suddenly ill, so we send her good energy during this moment, and I'm going to introduce our second speaker, Mpagi. You can find his bio right after the liturgy listing in the bulletin. Mpagi was forced at age 10 onto the streets of Kampala, Uganda, where he lived for almost 5 years. By age 14, he was an active opponent of the Ugandan president, Yoweri Museveni's dictatorship. While gaining his education, he grew as a leader working in the Democratic Party of Uganda. In 2004, the DP expelled Mpagi for advocating for protection of GLBTQ coexistence and opposing a presidential order subjecting the GLBTQ community of Uganda to arrest and torture. But Mpagi, remaining committed to protecting the lives and rights of GLBTQ Ugandans, founded Spectrum Initiatives, Sexual Minorities Uganda, otherwise known as SMUG, and was elected the organization's first public relations officer. And he founded Free Thought Kampala. Since then, he has traveled internationally speaking against export of lethal homophobia in Africa. In 2016, Mpagi fled Uganda under threat of arrest, torture, and death to seek asylum in the United States, where he continues to fight for the rights of all Ugandans under Museveni's oppression. Mpagi, welcome.
Good morning. And thank you for welcoming me to this church. And for the first time in 15 years, I'm in New York. It's true that I'm seeking asylum in the United States, but my body, mind, and soul is back in Uganda. Sometimes, being a political person, I prefer using Uganda Kingdom, but I will use Uganda because I want you to understand me well. I don't want to confuse you. I've decided to come to you to talk to you about the problem which is happening in Africa, but mostly in Uganda for one big reason. It's because the problem is coming from the United States to Africa. The citizens of the United States, not most of you, but some of them who happen to be Christians too, are taking hate to Africa, teaching families and governments to turn against their own citizens and children simply because they love differently. I have a long journey of activism for social and political, but I want to put my energy on this issue only for today because I cannot talk on everything. In from 2004 to 2014, several US citizens traveled to Africa, not just to Uganda. They funded and promoted hatred against LGBT communities, encouraging their governments to enact policies that would put them to death or in any way to end their lives so that they don't exist. That's the word they use. In 2009, the Ugandan government was influenced by the group of Christians in the United States and brought a law which we call the Anti-Homosexuality Bill in Uganda. And it was passed in 2014, but later it was challenged in court after we've made some good noise. Some of this noise was, some of you added your voices. The law was supposed to put gay people to death. So after that noise, the clause that put gay people to death was removed. However, there are some clauses within that law which are still impacting the way we live lives in Africa. Under this law, families were supposed to report their children. If you suspect your child to be gay, you are supposed to report him to the regime, to the government of Uganda, or else you become a victim yourself. You are arrested and put to trial and be sentenced to 5 years in prison. This law encourages employers not to employ gay people or the one they suspect to be gay. It prevents medical facilities to offer medical services to anyone they suspect to be gay. It prevents landlords from renting houses to gay people. So even though the death clause was removed, these other issues are still impacting people. And as a result, we are seeing more people running away from Africa seeking asylum to countries like the US, which is not easy at all. I've just told you that it took me 15 years just to secure a visa to come to the United States. And the journey is not yet over. I don't know when it will end, but I'm hopeful that maybe one day I will be able to win it or not. I'll be deported back to Uganda, I don't know, but I'm waiting. The reason why I'm here is to seek your solidarity. First, within the New York, I want you to open your doors for me to speak to as many people as possible to create this solidarity and understand what we can do together. When I refer to 2014, it feels like so many years have passed, but that's not true, because still the US citizens are still going to Africa. You are aware of Pastor Stephen Anderson from Arizona just been deported from South Africa and Botswana. He went on radio and started telling people to turn against gay or anybody they suspect to be gay. They are still raising a lot of funds to go to Africa, and indeed these laws, like the one in Uganda, was drafted in the US. We know because Uganda was colonized by the United Kingdom, so the way we write our English is totally different from how you write yours. So when we read these documents, we clearly see that the draft is drafted in the US and sent to somebody in Uganda to present it to the parliament. But we also know when these parliamentarians who received these documents fail to stand and defend these documents. That's when we know that they are not the owners. Somebody else in the United States is writing these documents and send them. There is also another problem at the UN. Do you know what's happening there? At the UN, you know that there are 119 countries, member states of the UN. Just recently, African countries led by Uganda, Botswana, and some Islamic countries came up and told the UN to drop the LGBT. They asked the UN not to tag the LGBT rights to the main convention of rights, as they call it. But not only that, when the UN appointed the international LGBT ambassador, African countries closed their door on him, and they couldn't let him go and examine and talk about these issues. What's happening now is that they've created what they call the family network at the UN. 112 countries are members of this group, including the United States. And the United States is funding these groups. So that's why I'm here to talk to you. There is a lot to discuss. We have very limited time, but I'm open. I'm in New York for 10 days just to listen and talk to everybody who I could find. I don't have a fixed program apart from one I have with Sage, but I would want you to open your doors for me so that we talk openly on what we can do. Thank you.